Um, First, I'd like to welcome you all warmly to the Kerala Museum's online oral history workshop series. There are three workshops in this series, and today's is the first. The museum is a vibrant art space in the city of Kochi. We have been here for 40 years almost. And in 2022, we began a very interesting project to start looking at contemporary Kerala history and to take it, to bring it in creative ways to our audiences. Today, that project, it's called the Journal Project, consists of research, conversion of the research into interesting digital exhibitions. And then also, these are all supported by the Journal Talks lecture series that has both subject experts, academics, and sometimes practitioners take us through contemporary Kerala and both sociological as well as historical developments over the past 200 years. Sometimes we tend to go back in time, further back than 200 years, but essentially our starting point is in the last 200 years. So the Journal Project had our research team getting out into the field, because much of contemporary research can still be, contemporary history can still be tracked through the stories of people who live in Kerala and people who also do not live in Kerala. As you know, Kerala has a large population outside of the state. So the Journal team began the process of going out into the field to collect stories, to collect histories. And this began our sort of interaction with this idea of oral history. And as we also brought in academics for the Journal Talks series, which you can also view on our YouTube channel, we began to see that many of these historians or contemporary historians have also used oral history in their processes. It gives us, a much a richer history. And just to introduce what oral history is, it gives us a unique view of people from diverse backgrounds, diverse experiences, telling their stories of daily life. This can be daily life, it can be significant events, it can be subjective, it can be their own personal narratives. They can bring in, when you ask the question, what happened, you're also able to ask the question, what did you feel in response to what happened? And this brings in feelings, reflections. It tells us stories that cannot be captured otherwise. And when these oral histories are then brought out in creative ways, they can inform, instruct, and inspire future generations in ways that history that, a regular history cannot do. So what we've done is we've created these three workshops. One is an introduction, what is oral history. Tomorrow's is the partition memories story, where Anshul Malhotra will be taking us through how you can look at a topic that is far more difficult than simply collecting stories of people's lives. And then you also have Boats of Bengal with Swarup Bhattacharya on how to document oral knowledge traditions. So these three should give us a view into the tip of really what oral histories are about. And then hopefully, as we go along, we will create a few more workshops that we can delve into, and we'll be able to gather again to look at other perspectives on oral history. Today we have with us Surajit Sarkar, who is with the Kerala Museum as an independent researcher and curator, who has been working on the Janal project with us. He has been the vice president of the International Association of Agricultural Museums also. That's a very interesting project that he's working on today. Previously, he was associate professor at the Center for Community Knowledge in Ambedkar University in Delhi. He was also president of the Oral History Association of India, 2017 to 2019, and has been on the public advisory board of the Society for Cultural Anthropology in the US between the years 2008 and 2014. And most interestingly, prior to all of this and his academic career, he worked as a photocopier salesman, a bank officer, primary school teacher, video artist, and documentary film and TV director. And we won't go into his academic qualifications because that will take us even further away from what he does today, which is so many interesting things. This presentation is 15 minutes long and it's followed by a Q&A. So please share your questions, keep your questions ready, share them in the chat, and please make sure that you are respectful and sensitive to other attendees in the workshop. Tomorrow's workshop will conclude with a small assignment for those of you who are interested, and I hope you will all participate in that. It should be fun. And so on to our workshop. And Surajit Sarkar, where are you?
Hello.
We invite you to take the stage and begin your workshop.
Thank you, Aditi. And to begin with, I'd like to just remind everyone that the talk is going to be 45 minutes long, not...
Oh, sorry, 45 minutes, yes. And everyone, please stay on mute and we can have a chat after our Q&A is over if we need to, okay?
Okay, so here we are. And I hope you can see the screen. So the title of today's talk is called Creating Dialogues with Memory. And to me, that's what actually oral history is all about. We're trying to talk with, getting people to talk with themselves. That's what is the job of an oral historian. You want people to think about their own experience, their past, what they have lived through, and in ways which are not always easy, get them to talk about it. But before we begin, I'd just like to say one thing that is a question that has come up many, many times. And so so when we're talking about oral history, is it really history? How valid is it as a historical document? So actually, I would like to just say one thing. When we are talking about oral history, we are never going to get the full answer to anything. We are only going to get partial answers. Answers that are the viewpoints of people who have lived through a particular moment in time. It's never, I mean, if somebody wants to ask you today, for example, did it flood in Kochi today? Well, it's raining a lot, but maybe in your colony it didn't, but somewhere else it did. So the perspective of the rainfall in Kochi on the 26th, on the 25th of June 24 depends totally on where you were. And for example, if you were in Jhalawar or Jodhpur, probably it's not raining at all. So if you're going to talk about what is the weather like in India on a particular day, it totally depends on the place you were in. So it's the same situation with oral history. Our perception of history depends on where we were, what was our experience, who we were, what was our role in it, were we an active person, a bystander, and so on. So I felt that I should begin this talk by talking about what is not oral history and why you definitely don't get into something like this if you want. But beyond that, what is oral history? Oral history is a presentation of, it comes out of an open-ended, free-ranging discussion in which, just a minute, it comes out of a free-ranging discussion in which we talk to a particular individual about their experience of things, like I said, drawing upon a person's memory and experience. It also depends on what is the particular, the kind of answers you get. The answers you kind of get are not going to be objective. Nobody is going to, I mean, even if a person says, I know everything, and we have met many people like this, one single person cannot know everything. Our experiences, our memories are always partial, subjective. It is very experiential, means it depends on where we were and what happened to us. It doesn't tell us everything about a particular event. But on the other hand, every answer that you ask somebody tells you something about not only them, how it affects certain kinds of people who would have been at their point in their place in the world, and how a particular event affected them. So if you were to ask me once again, is oral history really history? It's not full history, it's a flaw. It's, people say, oh, it's flawed, but actually others call it soft history. It's not soft, because the experience of oral history is really hard depending on where you were and what happened to you. But as a historian, the real strength of oral history is that the way somebody tells you something tells us a lot about what is important to people. And if the objective of history telling is to know how a certain forms of a certain experience of events were to be seen from the person's point of view, then oral history is like a leading way by which we can find out a personal experience of history. Going to the next slide. I'd like to begin with actually a dialogue with memory, which began as one-to-one conversations with people about an objective, a very clear objective. How do people experience and explain urban flooding? Right. We all aware of it. Monsoons are coming very soon. Lots of places are going to be flooded. But how do people not just experiences, how do they understand why does it happen? What kind of, if it's happening over the years, then what kind of steps do they take in order to tackle it at that level? I mean, finally, it's a challenge. Living in floods is a challenge. How do individuals, collective groups, people in a locality, people along a street, how do they handle it? So when this project started, it started because a group of friends of mine in Manipur who knew that I worked in theater said, why do you not, can you create kind of like a public forum for discussion? But since we don't want the discussion to be like a very acrimonious exchange between people, can you think of a way by which artists are involved, local, what you'd call local intellectuals or local thinkers are involved? If there is any local history, can we bring that into the purview of the discussion? In a sense, we want to provoke discussion, which is which was supposed to be a little, thoughtful rather than the typical social media type of exchange, which is immediate, all in a public physical setting. So first, it's a 3-minute video. So you may or may not be able to hear the sound. So I will pause at intervals to tell you what's happening before we go along. Sorry. Okay, I'm stopping at the 30-second mark. As you can make out, the venue is a marketplace. All marketplaces are used, they are really public places, the best ever public place. But marketplaces usually shut down by the time the sun sets. And in Imphal, that's what usually happens. They're fairly clean places. In Imphal they were. And so it was a matter of talking to the market association to say that once your door shops are shut down, can we use the place to do a venue? And when it was advertised at the marketplace, it was an open place. So there were no tickets, anybody could walk in. It was kind of the greatest possible public setting in which to do an event, which was a discussion. Okay, so now, as you can see, once the sun went down, it's dark enough. We played our videos. What were the videos showing? They were showing few conversations we had with people in different parts of town about their perception of the flooding, what was happening to them, what happened to the houses. Remember that when the reason we were called there is because this urban flooding was building up tension between localities. In fact, it had come to the point where when people were trying to block the flow of water into one colony, all that was happening, but water has to move on. So it goes off into another colony. So this kind of, it was not really helping anyone. And instead, they were kind of getting worked up and it came down to stone throwing and stuff. So, which is why the organizers had called us in the first place. So while we had done a few oral interviews, like in all good oral history projects, we had to do some background research about flooding in Imphal. So unable to read Maithilan myself, I asked my friends, can you go to local libraries, find out, we want to look for old books that refer to flooding in this town. Sure enough, and we had given about a month to do research work to collect this information because it was an urban space, it was, and there were a few libraries, it was possible to think of doing reasonable amount of background research in a month's time. And lo and behold, what happened was in R.K. Binodini Devi, who was the queen at that time of, she was also a cultural activist from the royal family. She opened up her library to us and said, why don't you see in my library, maybe there is something in there. And we found a 400-year-old thin notebook, handwritten, about places in the Imphal Valley where floods are good, bad, or ugly. Written 400 years ago, information that was unknown, except it was written down by somebody and kept in a library. So what we did was, the camera team used to go, and this information was marked by particular localities. So the camera team went to different localities and showed the status of the flooding there and talked to people there. And now what you're going to see is, in this public forum, how the video of the same locality where this marketplace is situated is being played, and voices from the locality are describing what is happening, followed by this lady from the Women's Association reading out from the page and a half written 400 years ago of knowledge about flooding in that part of town. And after the videos were played, the cameras moved, the screen became the space where anybody could talk, whatever they felt about the flooding, what they saw, memories. I mean, I remember very interesting conversations I had during and after that day, but that's a much longer conversation. Just to say that suddenly the space where the information was coming to you became like a stage for you to actually be visible and your voice to be heard. And it didn't discriminate between who you were, whether you were a footpath vegetable seller or a member of the royal family. It didn't matter at all. Well, the upshot of this whole set of, we did almost for about a week, every alternate day going to a different part of Imphal. Then they apparently carried on. I left after that because as you can make out, it's not rocket science. It's very simple to do. It's like just basically connecting things together. But once you've done that, what happened, as I learned, was the municipality was asked by various people who had seen these shows to send their members to these shows so that they can understand A, history, and B, the present. Exactly what oral history and writ archival history, when they come together, become a really useful bit of information for people of all kinds and in all walks of life. And that's one of the main reasons why we kind of connect with oral history, is because it kind of provides a perspective of today on things that are happening and may have happened also in the past. It tells you about change. It tells you how people respond to change. More about that in our next slide. How do you get people to start talking? The previous slide you did show about, an event which helped. I mean, after we did these initial conversations, it became like a public event which provoked a discussion. You essentially have to get people to trigger their memories about times. The photograph on the right is a 93-year-old lady from a town in, I think it was in Hoshangabad district in Madhya Pradesh. We were trying to do, as part of a group of cultural group based in Piparia in Madhya Pradesh, we were trying to do a kind of history of farming transformation and how did the change from traditional crops to high-yielding varieties happen, and which villages still continue to grow the traditional varieties. We want to talk to people who are older. But how do you get people who are older to talk about the past? Well, there will always be something. All of us keep, we keep what is called junk at home. What is that junk? It's just things that hold memories for us. So agricultural memories would be connected to objects of measurement. Before the kilogram and the gram, agricultural produce was collected through measuring utensils or jars. In central India, they're called pai and say, but in different parts of the country, they have different names, but they have one function. The function is to collect agricultural produce. We pulled out from the houses we went to, we asked them to pull out their old old measuring jars, measuring utensils, pulled it out, and then asked the members of that family essentially one simple question. What do you remember being weighed in this when you were a kid, when you were older? Is there some year in which there was hardly anything to weigh? When did some incident around the weighing? Did somebody try cheating you? What happened when the transformation from using a system of weights which based on these utensils to the gram happened? What else was happening at that time? These are important events in a farming life over time. And we wanted to get people to talk, and that's how we kind of provoke this kind of discussion. Similarly, you see that plow on the lower picture on the left. The girl on the right has got other the ones which made of brass are contemporary. There's a one made of bamboo on the second one on the top left, towards the center, that's made of bamboo. The lower plow has got, if you notice carefully, the lady is got her hand on a funnel. That funnel is nothing else, but in English it would be called a seed hopper. You're dropping seeds, you're seeding the ground. Now, it's a kind of practice that has more or less died out with the arrival of tractors and stuff like that. In doing so, it has taken away the role of women as the people who guarded and minded the seed and maintained the seed's fertility and ability to regenerate. Storage of seeds was a very important folk practice. Storage of grains of any kind. And by showing, going to villages where they are doing seeding and talking about what happened, what happens now and what happened in the past, locating one family that still uses it. We got really interesting conversations because now this is a family in the village who others know of but have never really associated the seeding tool that they use. And then they themselves talk about the time when they use tools like this and what used to be sown, what happened. I mean, a lot of associated questions and knowledge emerge from that. Also, some very sad stories also emerge, about how certain kind of seeds are not grown anymore, or how they tried growing using chemicals. And once you start using chemical fertilizers and pesticides, then these traditional seeds which use the seed hopper don't really work so well. So then people with small plots of land become agricultural labor and the connection to the land is broken. Soon they have to sell the land. And the kind of, when we talk about the loss of land, alienation of land, historically, at a personal level, you get to know what is happening. And it's not always in history, it's also in the present. You get to know through oral history. This photographs in the same way, photographs can be a great way to get people to talk about a particular event or the past. These are a set of photographs I'd come across from a collection made by an Estonian who moved from Sweden to Canada after the Second World War. Now you need to know why Estonia for a minute. Estonia was both German, and in those days it was not Russia, it was Soviet Union. So it was both German and Soviet because it was in the front line. There are cases, there's a very famous Estonian film about how once the army that gained victory kind of wanted, asked people or forced people to fight for them. Like we hear about in Ukraine, people fighting for, people conscripted to fight because they don't have enough soldiers. But by 1943-44 in the Second World War, there was many deaths. Armies needed to get more people as soldiers, fighting soldiers. So all these lands that they had conquered, they got people to fight for them. And Estonia was in a country where, and this very famous movie tells you how two brothers of a family were on opposite sides of a battle, one fighting for the Germans and one fighting for the Soviets. Now in a place like that, after a lot of the country was devastated, people had to move. And Canada offered kind of possibilities of migration after the war. These are the photographs taken by Lydia Manik, and you see everyone smiling, just like we see in social media today. But actually, think about it. They've spent 6 years through a horrifying war, and in a ship in which they are probably flooded half the time. I remember Lydia himself saying that in this whole month, I ate only 2 meals. I could not stomach food. Imagine what would happen to you if you had only 2 meals in 1 month. The awful nature of the journey just does not come out through the photographs. But if you start talking to people about that journey, it's a very traumatic moment for them. And you'll learn more about dealing with people going through trauma, even if the trauma has been bottled up for a long time. Tomorrow when Anchal talks to you, But suffice it to say for now that if these photographs didn't exist, most of us would have no clue that this was how people actually came across to Canada. Today they are second generation Canadian citizens. Photographs can, like, to provoke memory, and to come back to my word of the presentation, we have to be provocative, yet we have to be sensitive. And in order to do that, there are ways one has to kind of know how to use the kind of tool that is available to you as an oral historian. Where to be quiet, where to talk, where to take a back seat. People might want to talk all kinds of things, which may or may not be the answer you're looking for, but that's not important. The role of an oral historian is to get a sense of what people experienced. And sometimes to describe an experience is not a cut and dried answer. It's a mood you're trying to say by talking about it was horrible. I mean, for myself, I mean, I wear specs today and I've worn so for the last 50 years. But like, I remember when I got my spectacles, I did not want to wear specs and go to my class the next day because I was afraid that I was finally in class 8 or class 6 or something. And uh, in class 6, we know, our friends don't mince words. They say, oh, Chashmu, let's kick him, let's pinch him, let's do something. You don't want to be harassed. Similarly, the subject of your oral history interview does not want to be harassed. Remember that. Photographs in non-traumatic settings are again another great ways to find what happened to the histories of a place. In Delhi, we used to do what is called the Neighborhood Museum program at Ambedkar University. Every year, we picked up one locality in town in which we tried to bring in the story of that locality over time. Remember, the city of Delhi, in 1947, it was 500,000 people. In 2024, it's almost about 20 million people. Some people say it's more. That huge explosion in numbers means people live somewhere. They have created an identity around being in Delhi. They have created a sense of place. But what exactly is it? In order to know that, we felt that creating local exhibitions, in which people who contribute are also the viewers, is a great way of actually finding out oral histories about place and also oral histories that are shared. You don't want somebody's point of view saying that I hate that neighbor of mine. That doesn't tell you anything about the place. It only tells you something about the relationship between you and that neighbor. So what we did was we community sourced photographs. We did like in the Imphal example I told you, we went around collecting few photographs from people who were willing to share it and put them up in little exhibitions, and we got people to talk about it. And you know what happened? We got people to talk about it, and on the left you can see how we've created exhibitions of photographs and text. So people get a sense of what a person's sense of this particular place called Nizamuddin was when they in 1960 or 1950. By day 3, we had people coming to us saying that you never came and asked me, I've got so many photographs, you never took it from me, I can tell you so much about it. So we actually had to make a kind of screen in which at the end of every day, we put a USB stick with the photographs received the previous day and stuck it in this LCD screen and played them so that people felt validated that our contributions are there for you to see. One of the most important things about oral history and ethical oral history is the person who shares must always know what is happening to the material and what is it that you're using. Therefore, a local exhibition is a great way of actually showing how the information that is shared is going to be used. It's something I would recommend that we always try to do. If not an oral exhibition, then maybe create some small little pamphlet or a photo with photos and text that you can distribute to show a history of a place where you can place in a temple or a church or a mosque or somewhere, so people can pick it up, because these are places that people always go to, religious places on one hand, or clubs, associations, things like that. Now, this is a very particular personal example which was told to me in a sense. It didn't start off being an oral history exercise, but it ended up becoming one. I spent a long time in Pachmadi, which is very near Pipanya, with the area I've been fairly familiar with. And I used to live in this house, which was just behind the big Adivasi Tola. We used to have a cricket team. We used to play cricket and so on. So I was A team and B team. I was in one of the, I think the B team. And given my age and ability to run, I was one of the only person who had a runner in the cricket team. The people allowed me to do all of that because I was I kind of helped create local theater groups, which on various days, which are public festival days, people did little theaters about an incident from their village or from their understanding of the past or something like that. So this story is about how a group of 5 children from 12 to 7, they were playing in the sand, as I've written out here, creating paths, hills, flowers. And I noticed that they had the path that they were following never went up the hill, but everyone, their fingers went up the hill and then came down again and then went along. So I said, what is that hill that everyone goes to, but you don't? They said, oh, this is Baradev's hill. This is the hill we go to pray in. And another kid at that moment, as I've written in the last pair, said, you will never understand all this. You don't live in the village. You people in the city, from the town, for you, God is here and here and here. He doesn't live in the forest or in the hill. The whole, in a nutshell, the difference between an indigenous animistic view of nature and religion and gods versus a more settled form came up to me. Something that we as historians and folklorists would know, but to be reminded that even children know this, except by the time we grew older, we have so much other stuff that comes into our head, we forget these little things that can actually help us. So since this is part of a workshop, the first presentation of the workshop, I think I'd like you to remember, oral history is not just about talking. It's about pictures also. It's also about sounds. There are some people in the audience here today I know who also work with sound. Sounds of places, how different they are from each other. What is a particular kind of sound? Many of us may have been reminded by elders or people from elsewhere saying, this place just sounds different. The tempo of life, the sounds of busy city streets can kind of scare people who come from smaller towns when they come to the big city. So can smells. I mean, coastal places smell different from dry desert towns. Places within dry desert towns which are next to garbage heaps, they smell different. And then you see that how the kind of smell in a place is also connected to your social status, your ability to afford housing. Conversation around smells and home, about what you have to do to get water, to drink, tell you a lot, not just about water itself or town itself, but about how the different categories of people and where they're located and so on. And one of the ways that oral history actually is very helpful here is that when we look at history or practice, or what is called academic practice or theory of urban studies, usually it's about the people who are in a circle of decision making, of influence, of power, of language. If you don't speak that language, you won't enter the history books, or you won't enter academic writing, unless the person who's the academic goes out of the way to learn another language in order to be able to talk to you. Before you know it, we are reminded about so many things that determine who human beings are and where their place is in society. The core of it being first-hand experience of living and working. The language, the dress, the smell, the speech, all of this together makes up what we call oral history. So it's been almost about 45 minutes, so I will 40 minutes now. So I'm just giving you a few websites here, which kind of you can look at, and we'll share this with. We'll put it on in the chat window as well. And do follow us on Kerala Museum. We have social media. Please remember the journal archives are something that we are trying to build up in much more layered and complex ways. And one of them that we would really like to begin is actually the Kerala history of the history of Kerala's coasts in all its dimensions, part of which we've started this oral history program to introduce people who will later on become part of our team, we hope, in understanding the range of things that oral history can cover. And I have only touched on a really very small part of it. Thank you. So,
Avni, if you can just switch on my video, because I'm not able to from my side. Thank you, Surajit.
Thank you.
That was a great introduction, and lots of stories from your experiences over more than a decade of working with oral histories, right?
Many decades.
Many decades now. Yeah. So all of you participants, you all can please share your questions in the chat. And we have Avni, who's the Kerala Museum Programs Associate, who will reshare them for us. And Surajit will take 6 to 8 questions, and we can, you can ask all of your doubts, your questions, your queries, or maybe even put it out to the wider group as well, so that we can share our experiences with oral histories.
Oh, there was a question here.
Yeah.
There is a question.
Is it you can take them yourself also? You can read them out yourself also?
I can read the question here.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Sophia Juliet has written that when we are doing collaborative oral history where communities are involved, how can we ensure that proper credit is given to all the collaborators? What are the
very good question. Yes.
So I think to answer your question, the most important thing is how visible is your collaboration? I mean, at the core, you have to make your collaborators visible. And in order to do that, I have found that while the process of research and collection is often a one-to-one or some kind of thing, which it is going to be because it is finally a collector, an interviewing with 1 or 2 people, at the most 3 a group. But when we start, the importance of locally sharing is to kind of give credit locally to the people who've contributed. I think that's a starting point of an ethical collaboration. In the area in the place where the information has been gathered, to show that these are the people who've shared with me. That not only actually is very helpful to you as an oral historian, it also ensures that the people who have shared with you recognize that their sharing is validated, and B, often it makes others also want to collaborate. So it actually adds to the what we would call the hinterland of what we call oral history. So sharing. I won't use the word ethically at all because it's more of a legal term. To me, it is like if you want to remain friends and go there 10 years later, you don't want to pick up fights. You have to tell people who all helped you on this. To me, the basic line is I have to be able to come here 10 years later and I don't want to be thrown around or said, nobody talked to me, did this that day. At least the majority of people should be able to say, hi, nice seeing you here. It was great. Why don't we do something like this again? Does that answer your question, Sophia? There's another question here. How can we initiate talking to villagers about sensitive topics, such as something relating to a particular tradition, which may or may not include discriminatory? Actually, that is often something in our initial interviews with them, initial conversations, They themselves will tell you this is something that we don't often share with people. As has happened to me a number of times about, gone death practices. They told me, we are telling you because we know you are, but we don't tell everyone about this. So then you immediately know that I can not want to, I don't want to talk about this to others. But then being a kind of curious kind of guy, when this happened to me as an incident, I said, no, you may be wrong because you're talking about putting the upturned baskets over the day-old chicks. I'd read this in Barry Elvin's book years ago. So I said, is that, they said, who told you this? I said, nobody told me, I read it in a book. Then it is a book that has not been printed in Piparia or Bhopal or Jabalpur. It must be Delhi, Bombay ki kitab. Those people know where to get information from. It is not local. Immediately, there's a sense of it is distance it from us. We don't want to know. When you're talking about discriminatory practices, when you're talking about practices that are held close to the heart, they don't want people nearby to know about it. That's very much part, a core of their being. And I totally would never talk about this kind of thing locally. You will know very well what can be shared and not. And you as a sensitive interview should pay attention to it. How different is the gender? Jihan asks, how different is the gendered approach you have taken, if at all, on your role as oral historian? What are the considerations you need to factor in doing so? Well, in one line, if I want to have conversations with largely women, I would not have that conversation. For the simple reason that many of the reference a woman makes is never, men won't get it, right? And if I've come from another community, if I don't belong there, chances are even higher that I won't get it. So therefore, that tells me immediately that oral history is in itself, from the beginning, is a collaborative effort. You have to have local people there with you who are part of the community and who are of both genders. Otherwise, you can't move forward. Does that answer somewhat your question? Can we consider saying the idiomatic expressions about some historical event? See, an idiomatic expression is not itself oral history, but it is a great provocative point to start exploring oral history. It's the tip of the iceberg about a particular event. Ask people, why is this said ever? And then you'll just, depending on whom you ask, whether you're asking a sage or you're asking the worker, you'll get two different perspectives on that saying. What is can we publish an article or a book on an event or incident based on oral history or knowledge gathered in such a manner? What are the points to be taken care of? As research methodology is completely different in each case. Yeah, you're answering it yourself. Research methodology is different, and you have to indicate what is the method by which this information came. If you don't do that, you're not being ethical. Once you do that, then you go ahead and use it. But please be clear how you got this information and for your collaborators.
Sorry to interrupt, Surajit. Do you have that's a very good question. So do you have an example where in a single project you had two very different approaches that you had to?
Okay, yes. I don't have the book with me right now. This was a oral history of Piparia town, which is amazing. I'm just putting it on chat here for everyone in the meeting.
Yeah, I think everyone's sending you the questions personally, so we're not able to see it on the general chat also.
See, Piparia, the book is called Aise Basi Piparia. It's available on Amazon. It's a book in Hindi. It's an oral history of this town in Hindi, available on Amazon. It's a 250-page book. It has about 100 odd interviews, less than 100. I think 78 to 88 interviews were done to make that book. But the book also used archival history, what is called quote unquote history from libraries. So then, to answer your question, in these 200 pages, wherever we kind of had a practice in the method we employed was the first couple of chapters were largely a historical account of why Piparia was a town which didn't exist when the railways came into that part of central India. It became a railhead for the British hill station of Pachmadi, and because of the cantonment, which was to safeguard the central Indian hills. So because it was an important railway station, it became a large. It started off as a railway town, and then because that part of the country was very agriculturally rich, it became a huge agriculture and commercial center, and so on and so forth. Right. So when the first couple of chapters in the book talk about the historical background to this place with hardly any oral history. But then we say that the rest of the book, we've divided into a kind of chapters based on not only chronology, but on methods of transport, what railways did to the town, how agriculture shifted from cotton to pulses and wheat, things like that, and the rise of commercial agriculture, what happened to the Adivasi. Now, all of those chapters have a lot of oral histories. Each interview is annotated. So at every point an interview is used in the book, there is an annotation number. And the end of the book has a list of all the people whose names have been used and the pages in which they appear. So there are a number of ways by which you can kind of create ways in which you give references to people when you're writing books like this. And I would leave it to you to kind of figure out which method you want to use. There are many different kind of examples. While dealing with oral histories around themes like partition or 84, which are relatively recent incidents in history, we still have survivors or people who experience them firsthand to give their stories. But while wanting to approach much older themes, which you say are more 100 years or incident, would you want to build a story of survivors based on the children, grandchildren's voices in the second generation? How does one go about approaching that 100-year-old incident? Correct. Would the approach be relevant or valid? How would the responses be compared to the first-hand experiences? Very important point. And I'd say, look at the Piparia book again, because when the town was first settled, none of the people who are today were alive. The oldest person in town is like 90, 100, but the town was set up 140 years ago when the first railway halt was made. None of these people were alive. So it's a combination of both. It's a bit of second-hand experience, second-hand memories, but then to get corroborative information, you look at other historical sources, because you're finally going beyond a person's lifetime into the past. So then the only options left are corroborative sources, which are historical records. But then I would like to mention rich sources of historical records are not necessarily the history books. They're travelogues, magazines. One of the things we pay so little attention to is travelogues by people writing in Indian languages across India in the late 19th and early 20th century. They are Indians who are seeing part of their land for the first time, and they're writing for the people back home. They have a perception which is not colonial, which is coming from a small regional language speaking background, and their mind is looking at that new place like that. I have found I don't know most of the languages spoken in this country, but it doesn't matter. I have friends who speak most languages. I can get them to either translate or find me someone who can help translate. Niharika Singh is asking, what was the name of the queen who gave you access to her library for research work? R.K. Binodini Devi. Sorry, spelling was all gadbad. Binodini. She's no longer alive. She's passed away about 8-10 years ago. But she was very much alive when this thing was happening. And her face is also there in that video you saw. When she's the person who's standing next to the screen and talking. She was a painter, illustrator, painter, and a cultural activist of the Meghdi language. So she immediately got the importance of oral history and kind of opened up her library to us. There will always be people who have libraries in small or big places. Kochi is full of people with libraries, some of them which are known to people and some are still hidden in people's houses. Most of Kerala is like that, actually. It's a question of just getting to the right person. There's huge amounts of information available that we who are part of the written language generation don't even know that they exist.
Yeah. Any more questions?
Rajeshwari Banerjee asks, I do not know whether it should be. Okay, Niharika says, can you please name a few travelogues? Please send me an email about this or send an
Yeah,
email.
we can share. We'll share some more resources at the end of the 3 days. Based on what people are asking for, we'll kind of collate everyone's inputs, even from the other two speakers, and we can share a collection of. Can I ask you all to quickly switch on your video so we can take a group photo, a couple of group photos, and I hope you all will join us tomorrow. Avni can share some of the joining information on chat. Please save the, sorry, not the joining information, the contact Kerala Museum information on chat. And through that, you can follow us on social. You can also follow us on the YouTube channel where you can see these journal lectures, some of which look at history in general and some of which look specifically at Kerala history. And all of them are new and interesting approaches to history. So you can see them. Some of them are in Malayalam, but most of them are in English. And yeah, and we'll be continuing this series tomorrow and day after, and then we'll be doing another round of oral history workshops. And we hope that you all will be able to join for that as well. So please turn on your videos, everyone. And if we can just quickly take a photograph of everyone here today. Any other questions about oral histories, you can keep them so that you can ask tomorrow and day after also. Thank you all for joining us today. Thank you,
Surajit. Here.
Yeah,
it's
yes.
quite an interesting one, Rajeshwari Banerjee. I do not know whether it should be an appropriate question to be asked about or not. But as you have been linked yourself through this oral history, what are those most important or other most effective nuances that you're putting yourself through? I am wondering what this question is actually. Are you trying to say what are interesting things that are you still around, Rajeshwari? Can you just explain? Rajeshwari Banerjee.
Yes, good afternoon. Sorry, good evening. I think that I want to know that what are those important things that carved inside yourself? Like,
what has changed due to experiences with oral history?
Maybe.
Or, okay.
Actually, in hindsight, one of the things that has emerged is courtesy my work in oral history over the years. I now have really friends from Manipur to Kutch and large parts of the country. And I am really so grateful because of that, as you see different places, you understand what makes people and places tick. You also can sense differences. And, all in all, it also makes you a person is a little more broad-minded. And I think that is a really important thing to be. Because to get out of the narrow bounds that we otherwise find ourselves in, there is nothing like actually talking to people wherever they may be, as long as they are from different strata and places.
That is a fantastic takeaway. I think that's a great takeaway. Thank you for asking that question.
May I ask one last question, please?
Yeah, sure. Now we're just informally chatting, so you can ask.
Yeah, okay, fine. Achha, I thought you were about to close the program.
We're done, but you can ask a couple of questions. Yeah, go ahead.
Dr. Sarkar, sir, thank you for this lecture. I was unfortunately late due to certain things, so I missed out part of it, but I'll catch up on the recorded session later on. Sir, I wanted to ask you about the significance of oral history recordings in the military field because I'm a retired military person who was till some time ago a director of a military museum and archive, and oral history didn't play, wasn't part of our collection in any form.
Actually, it's a really interesting question. I mean, to begin with, I come from a family, my dad was in the Air Force. So I have grown up in that kind of background and quite immediately get what you're saying. I'm actually remembering an incident that happened which will never make it to history books, uh, but happened in the life of a 10-year-old in the 1971 war, and I'm putting myself out there. I was like a 9, 10-year-old. Many things got my interest, and one day we used to, since it was an Air Force station, there were very few of the families still left. Only a few families stayed back in order to make, because to ensure the that food was available. So between the messes and families together, they actually was creating the food for all the to provide to the officers' mess that would go out to all the officers who were otherwise doing whatever they had to do in Air Force station. So my dad used to, I think in those 14 days of that period, I probably met my dad twice. But in one of the times, he talked about a really ghastly accident that had happened right over the airfield, in which an aircraft that was badly hit was coming into land and collided with another aircraft that was trying to help it coming into land. Right. It was like, so everyone was really sad. It was awful. But as a 10-year-old, 9, 10-year-old, you don't see things that way. To you, just, oh my God, they crashed at the airfield, and started laughing about it. How silly. And the next I know, I got hit and I went flying across the room. And I said, oh my God, this is never going to hit any history book, military history book about being a member of a military family. But I think when you're talking about military museums, the role families play in military in order to keep things going could be a really important part of any military museum. And I remember talking many years later to people who were doing oral histories of the Royal Air Force, especially the Second World War. And for them, oral history was a very, very important aspect of it.
Sir, thank you for this explanation. May I have permission to communicate with you
Yes.
after this in the forthcoming days about this aspect and how I can begin this? Though I'm a retired officer, but I still have influence in the library, and there's nothing to stop me from beginning an oral history section except that I just do it.
It
So,
would be
but I would like to, have an intellectual conversation and learn more about the various aspects covered, like, for example, ethics or best practices, or, like you brought out. I mean, I was thinking more in terms of the personal experiences of soldiers in war, but
even
here you
that will
brought
come.
out something else, which is another stakeholder whom I had not considered, the military family. So, for that reason, I'd like permission to communicate with you.
Please, absolutely do get in touch with you have the Kerala Museum
Yeah,
team with you. So just get in touch and we'll be in touch after that.
yeah.
Okay, but
We'll
just for your
connect you.
information, my name is Colonel Ashwin Baindu, retired. I'm
Ashwin.
a retired engineer officer of the Bombay Surface.
Sure, sir.
Thank
Thank
you. Nice
you.
meeting
Thank you
you.
for your question.
Can
Thank you for
I
your
have the
interest.
permission to ask a question?
Uh,
Because I wrote it in the chat box, but somehow I don't think it's visible.
yeah, I don't think it's visible.
Is that Nandini?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay. So
Could you
Dr.
put your
Sarkar,
video on, please?
yeah, just a sec. My
Possible? Yeah.
network is not too great, but I'll just try. Is it on? I can't
Yes.
see. So
We can see you. Yes.
okay.
Please go
Okay.
ahead.
So my question essentially was, because you're talking about getting the person who we are interviewing or speaking to speak. So provocating the speaker to speak, but we are also talking about harassment, that they shouldn't feel in any way, their space is being intruded upon or that kind of thing. So isn't it a very fine and thin line that we are treading, where we want them to speak about, and sometimes it could be personal stuff. So, I mean, how do we go about it? Extremely naive and not yet experienced person, just interested in oral history.
It's a question that's important, because even if we are not oral historians, we do come up in situations where we have to talk to talk to somebody about a very traumatic moment in their life, right? In a situation like that, what is it? Just think of how you would tackle it. You don't want to just keep leading with questions. You don't want to lead the conversation. You want to take a back seat. You want to give people time to think before they speak. And you know that since it is a difficult moment, they may talk about all kinds of things which you'll say, but they're not answering my question. But they're not interested in answering the question. The first thing they're interested in doing is, in their own mind, nobody's probably asked them this before or has not asked them for years, if at all. In which case, first they have to come to terms with themselves about thinking about it. Then comes talking to somebody else. You have to give them that time. So when I use the word provoke, you are 100 times a day we meet people and we provoke them. Sometimes we don't even know that we provoke moments of trauma in people's life by just asking a simple question. We don't know that. So what do we do as a sensitive person? We stop and we don't kind of step in with, we don't, quote unquote, the word is mansplain, but we don't do that. We wait for someone to answer.
Or be a good listener.
Be a good listener. That's all you have to do. And when I use the word provocative in a larger collaborative sense, I am provoking a discussion between people. I'm not provoking a person. It's a very different thing. I want to build up a conversation between a group of people. So I'm just throwing in some things which I know might interest someone to talk about it, and somebody else will respond in a different. That's enough. Moment there's two people responding on the same question, you know that the discussion has started. Because each of us come from our individual space and we have experienced it differently. We'll talk about it and think about it differently.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
May I ask a question?
Yes,
Surajit,
thank you.
KG. Hi.
Right.
It's actually not a question. It's something that troubles me a little bit from the beginning, is that when you actually record an oral history session in any form, as a film or as a recording, or you write it down, or you print it, or you externalize it in some way, I will not actually killing the fluidity of the oral history. Does it remain oral history anymore once you record it?
Once you've recorded somebody speaking or even taken down notes, that oral history is taken a different form now. It's taken either a digital form or a written form if it's text. For that person alone, somebody else reading that about a particular incident or a way of life will start talking about, will respond orally about something else that happened, or may disagree, agree, or says, or add on to it, but then it still remains oral. That's not been recorded. So to answer your question, oral history is one of those unique things which, it's like a what's it? That there's a phrase that rolling you gather, and the roll it just keeps gathering and gathering and gathering, becomes larger and larger. All the multiple views, or the strands, or gathering moss as this ball keeps rolling down the hill, it just becomes larger, but it doesn't die. Because it's taking away one bit of my oral knowledge. It's not draining me completely.
Is that any different from recorded history?
Recorded
And
history.
if I can add to that, I was also going to ask, what's the difference between oral history and, say, reportage, or a reporter going and collecting news and testimonials from someone who has experienced something? How do we
Two very different questions, what you and Katie are asking.
How do you, yeah.
So first, to answer Katie, recorded history is one point of view. Most of the written history that we have, as a lawyer friend of mine pointed out once, you only hear the winning side in a case, and that becomes the law, and that goes on to affect people. We never hear all the other sides to it. We never hear the dissenting voices, even if it were of the judge. So oral history allows us to be able to hear all of that. So to answer your question about recorded history, or what is called archival history, there's that African proverb with, I think Chinua Achebe talked about, it's like as long as until the hunted
Things
have
fall
a
apart.
voice. Yeah,
And things fall apart.
then things fall apart. Until the hunted have a voice, you'll never get to know the history of the hunt. Right? You'll never get to know whether it was a single hunter or coming with an aeroplane shooting machine guns. You'll never go, because you'll only get to hear what the hunter said. Anyway, now to come to what Aditi was saying about, there is a difference to me between journalism and oral history. I entered oral history as a journalist. I was a television journalist. That is how I discovered. I mean, one of the first extensive stories I did was in this village called Veli near Trivandrum, where we were come to kind of look at how the village had created a reef and had kind of gone and sunk it in the just offshore, a few kilometers offshore. And I was very curious. I'd read about it in Down to Earth, the magazine, and I wanted to go to the village and find out how did they kind of get to that. When I went there, I learned about there was a shipwreck there, not exactly off Veli, but further away, which all fishermen had known about, how shipwrecks kind of become like schools or nurseries for fish. And because they are protected areas, the larger predators cannot enter them. I mean, so they wanted to create similar kind of spaces where fishes could kind of be allowed to form nurseries, and it would kind of regenerate the fish stocks. To me, that story came out of reportage. But when I went and did this conversation in Valley, I discovered about the stress between the coastal fishermen and the trawlers, which the journalistic piece didn't cover, because as a science journalist, it was only looking at reefs. Right. So there are, to answer your question, there are more elements, layers in a story. And as a journalist, in order to meet our deadlines or the objective, we often limit our layers. But as an oral historian, there's nothing limiting our layers. Unless we get to know all the layers, we won't even be able to get to know what the core of the story is. So we have to explore the layers in full. And to me, that is the main difference between journalism and oral history.
Thank you.
Can I ask a last question, please?
Yeah, I think this will be the last question, and then we'll split and join again tomorrow. And yeah, tell us.
Come in tomorrow, because it's a fascinating presentation going to hear.
Yeah.
Yes,
This is Rajeshwari again.
Can I?
Yes,
is it Rajeshwari again?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
So when you ask someone about their part of the history, or as oral history, like you're making them conscious about the act that you're asking them deliberately. So whether this consciousness does this consciousness hold the candid thing, or in a conversation, or it doesn't make it more like asking thing, or
a lot
there's
depends on you. Remember, to do an oral history interview, first you have to ask the person, are you willing to talk? And your conversation be recorded in some form or the other, whether in text or video or audio, whatever else. Right. Then there is immediately, moment you start the conversation, there is initial parts of the conversation are very formal. There will be. People are still trying to figure you out. Which is why one of the things as an oral historian, I always say, first spend some time with the people you're talking about, make friends. Talk about all kinds of things which is not connected to what you want to talk about, so that they get a sense of you as a person and you get a sense of them as a person. It's a two-way interaction. Once that happens, it could be an hour, it could be 3 hours. Ideally, do it at least over 2 sittings. I mean, I have done it over an hour, and I've also done it over years before I actually ended up having the interview with the person. So it's completely variable, but unless you get a sense of that person and allow that person to get a sense with you, don't expect you will start a conversation, which will reveal information that you otherwise may not have got, because you're triggering people's minds. And people's minds are willing to be tickled, triggered, only when they trust the person who's doing it.
Yes.
Thank you so
Okay.
much. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have one question. Can I ask?
Yeah, but can we
Okay, so
make this the last one, please?
yeah. We really need to
Sorry, as
wrap up now.
Dr.
So,
Actually, I am also a filmmaker, and sir, you are also a filmmaker. So I just want to know what is the difference between a research work before starting that shoot or that oral history.
I don't know about. See, without doing background research, whether you're a journalist or a filmmaker or an oral historian, don't even try. For the simple reason, if I want to talk to you and I don't know you at all, I may say something which you are not. And you'll say, who is this person who's talking to me? They obviously not even bother to find out what I do. It's like talking to a fisherman about farming. They're completely going to stop talking to you after that. Secondly, there are people who may not want to talk. After saying yes, they may actually, when it comes to the moment, they may suddenly be tongue-tied. Though when you meet them in a general setting, they are willing to talk. That kind of decoding for yourself comes out of A, doing some background work on the topic and the person you want to talk, and B, knowing, and the second part is knowing the person you want to ask. Both of these form background research. And whether as a filmmaker or as an oral historian, if you don't do one of the two or both, it's like a bad idea.
yeah. And experience also, I guess. Over the years, nah? Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you all very much for joining us and being such active and engaged participants today. Please join us tomorrow at 6 p.m. I'm sure it's going to be a very interesting session. Please save the museum contact information and do check out our Instagram and the journal website as well. Let us know what you like and what you've any other questions that you have. You can email us at info@keralamuseum.org. I'm Aditi, and we are signing off now. See you tomorrow.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye. Have a
Surajit,
good
Thank
just
you.
stay on
Thank
for
you,
a
sir.
Thank you,
for a few
doctor.
seconds.
Thank you, Aditi. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, sir.